for Joseph Baba Ifa. Baba knows the way, we follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients, he honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.
Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with Joseph Baba Ifa. Where only the strongest roots see the light, brought to you by Botánica candles and more. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. So today's episode is going to be on the Ogbe Obara, and this is going to be a gift to one of our most loyal supporters, Mr. 𝗵𝗫𝗍𝗏. My friend, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to have you within our viewership, and you are greatly appreciated. Now, Ogbe Obara has to be one of the most enjoyable Odus that anybody is going to study. So it speaks heavily of the Orisha Chango. He's definitely the shining star here. In this Odu, it's actually known as the Ifa of the double crown, right? Ogbe being an Odu very associated with this item, as well as Obara. And anytime you have a leg of Obara within a sign of Ifa, Chango is sure to be present, because when you translate Obara, it means king of the land, right? So we're going to get through a couple of the pataquis that speak about Chango, which are going to help us better understand him in his totality. Now, they say that in the Odu Babao Kanameji was where Chango descended upon earth for the first time, or when he was actually born. But some people say that in the Odu of Ogbe Obara is where his spirituality manifested in heaven, whether you want to call it Irumole, however you want to term it. But it's seen as the root Odu of this Orisha. Now, Chango here, of course, was a king. He's always a king. And he had a son, right, the prince. And Chango loved his son very much, but based on his lifestyle and based on his obligations, he couldn't always spend time with his son. And this caused the prince to start exploring, right? And the prince was desperate to get out of the castle and mingle with the townspeople in Oyo to get to know them, because one day he was going to be their leader. So one day, the prince decided to escape the castle and go out into the marketplace, right? Which is a very key aspect of Oyo's geography surrounding the palace. But ironically, it was the same day when they were going to do their annual sacrifice to Chango with a ram. But ironically, the way they would actually perform this sacrifice was with the ram symbolically inside of a box or coffin, however you want to interpret it. And the way they would sacrifice it is by inserting the knife into the box, right? Some people say it was a cloth. I think the box is a little more coherent of an interpretation. But in the hustle and bustle of the day, the ram escaped, and who actually ended up inside of the box was Chango's son. So he was going to be executed unknowingly. And Chango saw that his son wasn't there for the festivities, but he thought, you know, he must be doing what every other teenager's doing, sleeping in or just not showing up on time. And he said, you know, we'll move forward and I'll talk to him later about it. But at the moment when, you know, the prince started realizing what was about to happen to him, because he had seen this process a couple times before, he realized he was never going to see his father again. He was never going to hug him again. He was never going to kiss him again. He was never going to be able to, you know, tell his father all the things and grow as men together. And he started actually singing a song. And the song goes, Emi ọba ọmọlọ́yọ̀mọ́, mi ọba ọmọlọ́yọ̀mọ́, Emi ọba ọmọlọ́yọ̀mọ́, mi ọba ọmọlọ́jọ̀mọ́, akọ̀ríkọ̀ba ọmọlọ́yọ̀mọ́, Emi ọba ọmọlọ́yọ̀mọ́. Where it's saying, Emi ọba ọmọlọ́jọ̀mọ́, which means, I am the son of the king. Please take a look. And when Chango heard this song, when they were about to deliver the fatal blow, he said, open the box right now. And when they opened the box or the coffin, his son was there, and Chango ran down. It was a pretty emotional scene. And he hugged his son. He said, what the hell are you doing inside of this box? He said, you know, I got into some trouble. I fell. The ram got out. I fell in. And Chango said, I could have lost you, you know. And the prince was saying, I just want to spend time with you. I just want to explore. I want to be with you. I want to see what you do. And Chango realized at that moment he had been neglectful. And from that day forward, he said, I'll never spend a day without my child. And the prince and him were together always. And the day came when Chango was going to transition, and the prince learned everything he needed to before he was going to become king. And they had a beautiful relationship. So in this Odu, Ifa says that if we look at the point of interest for Chango, Chango here was a good man. He was a workaholic. He was a provider, a protector, but he got lost in the sauce of adulthood. And, you know, as men, coherent men, men that, you know, are of service to their homes and households, it can happen to any of us. You know, we're so focused on making sure the people we love are provided for and protected. Sometimes we don't realize we have enough money and we have enough resources to do both, and all they need and want is time. So Ogbe Obara is a reminder to all fathers and everyone in general. You know, we have to spend time with our family. We have to spend time with our children. Remember that, you know, our kids don't need a professional. They need a parent. And, you know, Ogbe Obara really reiterates that. And Chango, with almost losing his son, always remembered this. From another standpoint, Ogbe Obara is an Odu where the person has to be careful with curiosity, wanting to run before they walk. It's an Odu where we definitely have to test the ground before we start taking, you know, leaps of faith into different things. Now, that could be referent to business, life, whatever can be interpreted there. But we have to be very careful with our children in this sign. In this sign, the children would sneak out or escape. That's unheard of as far as teenage behavior. But, you know, we want to be communicative and transparent with our children so that we always understand what's going on because, you know, at this stage of life, you know, we like to think we have real problems, right? But, you know, kids, they're going through traumatic events every day. You know, they're learning something every day. And that is the worst thing that's happening to them at that moment where they haven't crossed that threshold into adulthood and understanding that we can't be emotional with everything that we're presented with. This is also one of the Odus that stipulates why Chango eats a ram as his predilect food. Now, when you look at the symbolism in this Odu, specifically this pataki, why were they sacrificing the ram in the box? And the ram was actually meant to replace the king, right? It was a way to ensure that the king never died. That's why you couldn't see the ram when it passed away. So it's an Odu where, you know, there's resources and options for longevity here. Where, you know, if someone's in a very difficult situation of health and whatnot, there's options here to be able to resolve that. But definitely a very popular story, and for every Babalao that is familiar with the Ebo, you've heard that suyere. Ogbe Obara babatele biatele babatele re oni Babalao adifa joko fun esese biatele babatele re adifa fun Chango biatele babatele re adifa fun olofin. And that's the prayer that I utilize for Ogbe Obara within the 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗁. And it basically is just reiterating the story that I'm actually going to speak about when Chango and Olofin actually interacted. So in this sign, Olofin wanted to make Chango 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲, right, or the king of the world. He had earned it with his aptitude, with his charisma, with the popular opinion about him. He had matured. And Olofin was very pleased with him, and he wanted to make it official so that Chango would be his representant on earth. So he called Chango. Now, mind you, Chango, ironically, that morning had a horrible morning. And, you know, he's like, I can't believe I'm going through all these things the day I'm supposed to be crowned. You know, I'm supposed to go meet with Olofin and coordinate my crowning. And 𝗀𝗏𝗏 was actually messing with Chango to test his character. So, unfortunately, when Chango arrived at Olofin's celestial palace, he banged on the door. You know, it sounded like thunder. And no one opened the door. So he said, I'm going to bang again. And he banged on the door again, even more viciously. And no one answered. And he said, this would be my luck. So he went to go see his brother, Oromila. And he's like, I need you to do a reading for me. I'm having a horrible day. I just banged on Olofin's door. He didn't answer me. Like, you know, let's pull to see what comes out. And when they performed Dafa, Ogbe Obara was revealed. where Ifa said that Chango had to have better character, that was the last thing he needed to learn before basically assuming the governance of Earth. And Chango said, but I have good character, you know, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 says you need to have even more good character because you have to have even more patience now because there's going to be more people that you're responsible for. So Chango realized, you know, none of what happened that morning was worth his energy or attitude. You know, he banged on Olofin's door. He could have died for that. So he said, let me go back over there and see if I can fix anything. So when he went back, he knocked on the door lightly. And Olofin kind of cracked the door. He said, who is it? He said, Chango, father. And Olofin yanked him in and shut the door. He said, oh my God, I was waiting for you. This guy came, somebody came and started banging on the door like a vicious animal. I got scared. I didn't open the door. And, you know, I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Because I know you would never knock on my door like that. And Chango was like, no, of course not. I would never do that. You know, thank God you're okay. Thank God I'm okay. You saw I knocked on the door nicely. You know, I'm having a great morning. You know, let's talk. And they were able to sit down. And, you know, Chango was crowned as king of earth in front of the world. And he was recognized and worshipped by all. Ogbe Obara is really where Chango, you know, became the king of the religion. He is the king of Ifa. And from what I understand, the day after the World 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 festival is the Chango festival. That lets you know how, you know, the hierarchy of Ifa works and how, you know, revered Chango is. He is seen as being on par with the magnitude of our whole tradition, period. So Ogbe Obara makes reference to that. But there was a huge lesson he had to learn here where Chango had to have good character. A king has to have good character. A man, a father, a human being has to have good character because we cannot allow a peon or a fly to disrupt the path of the leopard. You know, whether it's within Ifa or socially, we're going to have patience with people because some people aren't having a good day. Some people are not emotionally or mentally stable, you know, and you have to take all those things into account because Chango could have lost everything there, his whole life's work, just like any of us could lose everything by making an emotional decision, you know? So Ogbe Obara makes reference to you cannot lose sight of the bigger picture for something that's minute, you know, and the majority of people are minute if they're trying to come in between you and your goals, you know? So there's that. But apart from that, you know, it speaks of, you know, Chango fulfilling his destiny, his initiation processes, you know, becoming king. You know, it's really a lovely Odu. So now Chango's king, right? He has all the things he could ever want. But he's still having a little trouble with his character, which is pretty common when you look into his information. So when things were getting a little too intense, he decided that he was going to reach out to his father, Obatala. And he went to visit Obatala and said, you know, I'm having this trouble. I'm having these issues. I don't know who to counsel. Everyone expects something from me. And you're the only one who's been through this before, so I have no one else to turn to. You know, and Obatala started listening to him and giving him advice and saying, you know, you got to calm down here. You have to focus more on this. You have to let this go. And Chango started incorporating the advice of Obatala, even though he tried to accomplish it on his own. And Obatala's advice started working pretty well, where Chango was able to get things under control. And he was very appreciative of Obatala. And Obatala said, you know, I think it's time for you to have my crown as well. And in that epic scene, Chango gave Obatala 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏. He laid face down, and Obatala actually gave him the white beads to incorporate with his red ones. And in this Odu, apart from the Odu of 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏 Sameji, is the Odu where the necklace of Chango actually manifested with the red and white pattern. The necklace of Chango is also in the Odu of Iboru Iboya. And with the white bead, Chango was able to assimilate all of Obatala's character, all of his being, his form, his fashion, everything, where he incorporated it to be able to tranquilize all of that red-hot energy that he carried with him. Now, this Odu is why Chango's colors ended up being red and white in commemoration of Obatala, but this is also known as the Odu of the double crown. Now, even though this literally isn't the crown that Chango wore, this is the Ifa of the double crown of Egypt, ironically, where for anybody that's seen the crown that the pharaohs used to wear. In one era, it was just a red one. In another era, it was a tall white one. But when they unified, it actually became red and white. And that's actually in this Odu of Ogbe Obara, the crown of the pharaohs, which makes reference to when Chango actually received the double crown. That's why Ogbe Obara is known as the Odu of the double crown, because Olofin gave him one crown and then Obatala gave him another one. That's why Chango is known as 𝗃𝗏𝗏, or 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁, which means king of kings, right? Or 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗁𝗃, right? So it was really epic for Chango. He became everything here. Ogbe Obara is one of the most epic Odus, period, you know, especially for the children of Chango. It's very favorable for other Orishas as well. But I don't know. I mean, I can't think of a better Orisha here in this Odu. Now, Ogbe Obara here also speaks of the utilization of thunder and lightning. It says that whenever you hear or see any of these things, to rejoice, because Chango is working in your favor. It's one of the Odus that manifests the salute to Chango when we raise off of a chair, or we stand on our tippy toes, like, hey, the king is coming. You know, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗁, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗍. All of those things manifested here as far as Chango goes. And there might be other aspects of Chango here, but as I go through the other pataquis, you know, he might pop up again. But he's definitely the star of the show here with those three pataquis. Ogbe Obara. In this Odu, it speaks again of the Orisha Odudua. And Odudua, in this Odu, based on his behavior, lost his title of Olofin Aye to Chango. And it was based on his conduct. So Odudua lived on earth. Olofin Aye means governor of earth. And obviously Olodumare lived in the sky. And Olodumare installed Odudua on earth to govern it for him and to protect his interests. And Odudua was fine in the beginning, but with time, the seeds of arrogance began to sprout within his heart. And he started trying to challenge the sky. Like, he would send witchcraft to Olodumare, or he would undermine him and not follow his orders. Or, you know, Odudua was like, I don't have to listen to you. I'm king of earth. So Olodumare sent his brother 𝗃𝗏𝗏 to, you know, negotiate with Odudua and help him understand, hey, you're king of earth, but earth is just the beginning. There's a whole other 99% of the cosmos here. So, you know, follow protocol like everybody else does. I'm God Almighty. And Odudua wasn't hearing it. So it came to the point where Odudua was threatening 𝗃𝗏𝗏 and threatening the other Orishas, and he had become a complete tyrant. And Olodumare looked at 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 and said, I think I'm going to have to kill my son. And 𝘃𝗶𝗏 was like, oh, God, please don't make me do it. And Olodumare said, you have to do it. You're the only one he'll trust enough to let into the palace. So when 𝗃𝗏𝗏 went into the palace, Odudua was just intolerable, incorrigible. And he said, brother, please give dad his pound of flesh, because the next action is not going to be one you're going to like. And Odudua tried to kill him right there. And, you know, nobody can mess with 𝘃𝗶𝗏. He's just the man, you know. Of all the Orishas, of all the Ajogun, no one is more ferocious than 𝘃𝗶𝗏, like the Odo Beyono says. So 𝘃𝗶𝗏 basically cut his body into 16 pieces, right? And he put all of those pieces into a bag, and he was going to take the bag back to heaven, which he did. And when he unraveled the bag, or, you know, emptied it in front of Olodumare was crying. And he's like, wow, my son is really dead. We really couldn't come to a meeting of the minds. And then out of nowhere, Olodumare screamed, and Odua's head was actually biting Olodumare's feet. Where Olodumare kicked his head and told 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, get him the hell out of here. And, you know, they took him and buried him, and they disposed of him. So this Odu speaks of the code of the samurai, right? Because it says, if you lose an arm, fight with the other arm. If you lose your arms, kick with a leg. If you lose the other leg, kick with the other one. You know, and ultimately, if you're beheaded, bite with what's left. In this Odu, it speaks, we fight till death. You know, the war, the arts of combat, the code of combat, you know, all of these different things manifested here, where it manifested through Odudua first and foremost. But Odudua here speaks of everything we should not be. Arrogance, a lack of appreciation, not knowing our role within, the grand scheme of things. And it ultimately led to his downfall. This is also the second or third 𝗃𝗏𝗃 that we've mentioned so far that speaks of friction between father and son, right? So this Odu says that, whether it's with our parents, whether it's with our children, we have to try to maintain a healthy relationship with our offspring or those that, allowed us to be here. So in this Odu as well, unfortunately, is where or why parents can't be more friends than parental. I try to be as friendly as I can with my children, but I can never stop being a parent, because the day I'm their friend more than their parent, I cannot guide them in the same way that I should, because a friend can never reprimand anybody because you guys are all doing the same thing, hanging out, having a good time. But as a parent, you have to know that fine line, because that piece of advice you have to give your child may save their life in a way that a friend never could. So it speaks of that. Be careful of surgeries that are botched or medical malpractice as well. 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏 kind of did a hack job here. But unfortunately, Odudua, lost his title, and they actually installed Chango there. So he popped in again. He popped in there again. Ogbe Obara. In this Odu, it speaks of, the importance of knowing how to communicate, the importance of, gestures and charisma and all these different things. If my memory does not escape me, this is the Odu of the flamingo, ironically, which is an animal I really appreciate. And the flamingo here would kind of move in a way that would make other people very interested in him. Like the way he would kind of dance and move and talk and things like that. It would cause people to pay attention to him and be persuaded by him. They say that he was envied by the other birds, particularly the parrot, particularly the hawk, all the other ones who didn't have his kind of mambo, as we like to say, or his movement or his vibe. Where unfortunately, they did witchcraft and cursed him and things like that. This is actually the Odu where the flamingo loses his pink plumage, specifically the females, right? Because it has to do when they give birth and things like that, and they're so drained of vitamins and nutrients and things like procreating, where it takes them time to actually, manifest once more. Where he was able to bounce back from it. He spoke to Orunmila, divination, and both through Ogbe Obara and initiation, and he was at that point able to maintain his 𝗃𝗍, which was, the pink, right? So this Odu says that the person is going to have a gift when it comes to communication, interacting, sales, any of these different things. You just have to capitalize on it. But you also have to understand, with success comes detraction, comes envy. People really, love to criticize somebody thinking that, they were overnight success overnight. An overnight success takes 30 years to make sometimes, like in our case, to get to the point of where the channel is now, started studying Ifa when I was 7. So, it's one of those things where everybody has to understand, if somebody's in a position of stability or notability, more than likely it took decades to get there, because, it's just building and taxing and edifying to get to that ultimate goal. But Ogbe Obara says the person, when it comes to interpersonal interactions, is going to be extremely successful because of the way the flamingo would move and interact. Be careful with vitamin deficiencies, anything from an autoimmune standpoint, because the flamingo loses its plumage, after it has offspring. So make sure that we're trying to lead a healthy, active lifestyle, make sure we're not missing anything, and we're supplementing anything we can't get, so that we can always reap the benefits of the blessings that Olodumare gave the person in this Odu, right? But definitely one of my favorite animals. You gotta love the flamingo. In this Odu of Ogbe Obara, it speaks of the white dove pretty heavily. And apart from that, by the way, guys, a big, huge sacrifice here for Chango is either, a brown or white ram, right? I believe the story about, is it Abraham and his son? Biblically, I'm very rusty. I haven't been in Catholic school in quite some time. But the one where God wanted to test the man to see if he would kill his son, to show that he loved God more than his children. Some people say that story came from the story where Chango almost sacrificed his son, where he was willing to sacrifice his children to appease God. But that's interpretive, but that's there. But, it speaks of a white or red ram, not red, brownish, reddish, being offered to Chango. Very key. But another huge animal here is the white dove, right? In this Odu, it speaks of why, a person can't grab a dove by the chest too hard because it could actually cause their heart to explode or collapse. This Odu says you have to be very careful with your thoracic cavity, circulatory system, cardiovascular system, avoid cigarettes and things like that, synthetic tobaccos, any of those things, or even, God forbid, a weightlifting accident. You're doing a bench press and the bar falls on your chest and it's bye-bye. Things happen, so make sure you're taking precautions. But in this sign is why the pigeon looks more, robust than it really is. For anybody that's handled a pigeon, from a sacrificial standpoint, that it's mostly feathers, right, until you get down there. But in this Odu, it was where the dove was having beef with the serpent or with the snake. And, they would have arguments and things like that. And, it got a little gangster, like the dove was trying to, pop off on the snake. But obviously the snake has the upper hand. It's a natural predator. So, no matter how much the dove wanted to, the snake and was going to, strike him and eat him. So the dove would have to fly away. So after about the second time, the dove went to visit Orunmila, and Ogbe Obara was revealed, where Orunmila said, you're in conflict with somebody, but you're trying to confirm how best to handle it. And the dove was like, yeah, I want to kill the snake. The snake, he annoys me. He's always hissing and rattling and all these different things. And Orunmila looked at the dove and was like, but why are you so aggressive? Like, leave the guy alone. Like, but he's like, no, he's in my space. Well, here's the thing, though. How were you able to get here if you were in conflict with him? No, I flew away. And he said, well, why don't you do that all the time? Why do you feel like you have to engage in combat? He's like, no, I can't live with, not, handling him. And Orunmila said, well, you've been given the opportunity for peace. Why choose war? And the dove at that moment was like, wow, I've really been behaving like an idiot, And that's why in this Odu, the fight or flight complex actually manifested where, either we're going to engage in combat or we're going to live to fight another day. And that's why the dove, whenever you go like this or any sudden movement, it flies away, because Orunmila told him that was going to be his best mode of survival. So this Odu says, avoid conflict, pick your battles. It's not about getting one up on everybody all the time, because that's going to end negatively, because there's always going to be that one person that is going to try you to the point where it's like you have to choose between, all right, I'm going to handle this person, or I'm going to spend the rest of my life in jail, or am I just going to, leave it alone? Because if you're not going to take things all the way, in adulthood, it's best to just leave it alone altogether, because, is it worth it? And the dove had to learn that here, And the snake was minding his own business. I mean, he lived a lifestyle that the dove didn't like, but that really wasn't his concern. He had to keep it moving. So there's that. In the Odu of Ogbe Obara, it actually speaks of, once again, Olodumare's palace. This is a very regal Odu from a divine standpoint. And in this sign, Olodumare had white doves living in his home. Like, that was his thing. He liked all the opulence of having them there, but they had very bad habits. They would defecate on the floor. And for anybody that's, ever, experienced, any type of excrement, from doves, it's pretty nasty. And, Olodumare was like, you guys are beautiful, but you got my house full of it. And they were very lazy and they felt very entitled, until one day Olodumare got mad and completely kicked them out of, the palace, right? So now imagine if the palace is in New York and you have like all these white doves, and now they're around all these street pigeons, which are eating hot dogs on the corner off the floor. That's pretty terrifying. They're carnivorous over there. So immediately the doves went running back. They went running back and pecking at the door, like, please let us back in. Please let us back in. And Olodumare said, I'll let you back in as long as you appreciate all that I'm providing, and you guys would please use the bathroom in a place that's designated, so we're not living in filth. So they were like, we'll do whatever you want, but these guys, like the cats, the rats, and the other pigeons, they're going to have their way with us. Like, please, God. And, you know, he let them back in, and, you know, they took a bath, and, you know, they were able to stay there, you know. So this Odu says that we have to appreciate what's being given to us, because anybody could be the doves. You know, they were taking what Olodumare was giving for granted. It could have been metaphorically his children, his relatives, co-professionals, so-called friends. This Odu says the person has to make people appreciate what it is that they provide, because if not, they're just going to keep on abusing and using. And from another standpoint, the person could be Olodumare, know your value, know what you provide, know what to accept, know what to let go. But, you know, hygiene is very important in this Odu. This Odu says that our home is our temple, our body is our temple. Let's keep both clean and hygienic. So this Odu says that whether it's, you know, biologically or spiritually, hygiene is very key. If the person wants to raise doves, they can. But if they ever become stressed out by it or anything, they should probably not. But they are a beautiful animal, you know. So Ogbe Obara. In this Odu was where in the cemetery we begin to see this plant known as Yedra. Hyedra. This plant originally was in a very sunny, accessible, open environment. And it would really do harm to it. Like, it would burn its leaves and make it feel uncomfortable. It was a little bit antisocial. It didn't want to be overstimulated. So it went to visit Orunmila. And Ogbe Obara was revealed. Ebo was recommended. And once done, it had to be taken to the cemetery. Now, when the Yedra entered into the cemetery, he felt amazing. It was dark, it was humid, it was muggy, you know, and he was able to grow very well there. So he decided from this day forward, I'll stay here in the cemetery. So this plant, Yedra, can be found pretty commonly within cemeteries, ironically. But if we look at that plant, metaphorically, Ifa is saying that we have to be in an environment that assimilates us. We cannot just try to be anywhere, because unfortunately Ogbe Obara can't be just anywhere. It has to be in a place where it feels comfortable, because if not, it's going to be unproductive. So sometimes you have people who are more successful in LA. Sometimes you have more people that are successful in Sacramento. You just have to pick a place that you notice you feel well and are able to function, because whether it's marginal or affluent, you're going to be successful as long as you are able to, you know, evolve there and choose there. So that was the story for the Yedra, where the Yedra was trying to live in the sunlight like the other plants and be accepted. He realized very quickly that wasn't for him, and he did better in a darker, humider environment where he was around like-minded people and was able to grow very rapidly. So being that this plant lives in the cemetery, Ogbe Obara has a huge connotation and connection to Egungun, because it says that in the past life, Ogbe Obara was this plant at one point, and he did best in the cemetery. Now, I'm not saying we should be skipping through cemeteries, but this Odu says that Egungun and ancestor worship are very key in this sign for success, because the closer the Yedra was to the dead, the better he did. We have to be very careful with heat stroke here, exhaustion, rashes, irritations, allergies, asphyxiation. Don't be around people that are not common with you, vice versa. You have to go where you're celebrated and not tolerated, because the other plants were afraid of the Yedra because he was so different. But in the right environment, he was even more successful than they were. Right? So in this Odu of Ogbe Obara, it speaks heavily of the Orisha Agayu. And the Orisha Agayu in this sign was feeling mentally unstable. He, by nature, was aggressive. He was very stoic. He was very imposing. And he started to act somewhat irrationally, aggressively, and people were becoming afraid of him. So they went running to Orula and said, hey, you know, this guy's having a problem here. So Rumila sought out Agayu to be able to treat him. And when divination was performed for him, being that he was incapacitated, Ogbe Obara was revealed, where Ifa said that he needs to perform a head rogation or an ibori with breadfruit to 𝗃𝗃𝗃's head. And when this was accomplished, 𝗃𝗃𝗃 was able to snap out of the aggressive stupor that he found himself in. He was forever thankful of Orunmila. He was finally able to assimilate his regal roles as king of Koso and ultimately as one of the Alafins of Oyo, and, you know, was able to readjust. So this Odu says that there are options for whether it be mental instability, emotional instability. We have to be very careful with our character here, because this is another story in Ogbe Obara where, you know, the person became very aggressive, or the Orisha became very aggressive. First, it was Chango banging on Olofin's door. In this sign, 𝗃𝗃𝗃 was, you know, threatening to kill everybody. You know, it's pretty aggressive stuff. So, you know, with the solution of Orunmila and the attention, he's able to do that. Now, mind you, Ogbe Obara really speaks of the importance of attending to Ori, right? Ogbe Obara, in my opinion, at least once, should definitely do a head rogation with breadfruit at some point. Another very key offering to Ori here is the 2 white doves, which are very key. And all of these things help realign Ori. Ori is definitely a deity that Ogbe Obara should receive at some point to help them get organized emotionally and mentally so that they can reign, because Ogbe Obara is meant to be regal. They're meant to be in a leadership position. They're meant to guide others towards a successful end, because they were just born leaders. There was a pretty well-known Babalao in Cuba who was Ogbe Obara. I believe his name was Covarrubia. And I've always heard very positive things about him, how he was a very prepared gentleman. But I believe his Odu was Ogbe Obara. Ogbe Obara ultimately is, you know, one of the most important signs in Ifa in general. But apart from that, also a very staple sign within the Ebo, whether it be in the Lukumi 𝗃𝗏𝗃, or ultimately I've seen various 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗃 in 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗃 where Ogbe Obara verses are incorporated, because it's just a very powerful Odu all the way around. For anybody that has this, you know, in their hand of Ifa, or ultimately initiation, it's because they're meant to accomplish, you know, greater things within the spirituality or within life in general, right? So this Odu, you know, as far as affiliated deities, pretty much Ogbe Obara, you know, the big ones are Egungun for sure. 𝗃𝗃𝗃, Chango, Odudua is very big. You know, for the brothers who are Babalaos that have this Odu, Iba Odu is very key here as well. If you have the capacity and the ability to receive it, you know, why not? But it's just an Odu that speaks of very grand things coming for the person with the right tutelage, guidance, and literature. So my friend Beniel, thank you so much for the support. Definitely a lot of good information here for you to have as reference, apart from the other dialogues and interactions that we have. And from the sincerest plate in my heart, Abure Iboru Iboya. So, guys, a couple notes before we go ahead and disconnect. BotanicaCandlesandMore.com is up and running for all your service and product needs. We do ship. Classes are available, Moyuba class or the 4-week curriculum. Be on the lookout for the gala workshop here in Orlando announcement. It's going to be a really exciting time with some great people learning Ifa, politicking and collaborating. Really exciting stuff. Can't wait to meet each and every one of you. If you can't watch us, please listen to us on all of the audio platforms for podcasts, whether it's Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc. Please be sure to subscribe, like, comment, share. I love reading all of them. A big thank you from all of us here at Our Roots Podcast. And until next time, guys, see the light.
Baba Joseph showed the path today. Baba knows the way, we follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients, he honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.